pioneer of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. General orientation. Eglantyne Jebb's main ideas emerged as a reaction to the depressing experience of the terrible devastations produced by the First World War. Soon after the end of the war, the League of Nations was founded as outcome of the Paris Peace Conference in 1990. The League was the first international organization being founded in order to promote and maintain world peace. Collective security and disarmament were the main goals. But these goals failed, as you know. The same miserable experience and the same objectives incited the nations of the world to establish the United Nations after the Second World War in 1946. With more vigor than the League of Nations, the United Nations started efforts to ensure that children can grow up in freedom from violence, healthy and educated, and well-educated, respecting different cultures and ethnic origins as the fundamentals of a just and peaceful world. But the origins of such endeavors were present already in the League of Nations. The Declaration of Geneva on the Rights of the Child was an important step to bring children on the international agenda of politicians. It was the achievement of Eglantyne Jebb, also of organizations which she founded and which gave her support. But foremost, it was her personal accomplishment. Eglantyne Jebb was born in 1876 in the small community of Ellesmere, Shropshire, in England, and lived no longer than until 1928. At the age of 52, she died in Geneva, where you will find still her tomb in the St. George Cemetery. Eglantyne Jebb was born in a well-to-do family. It was not personal hardship which opened her eyes for the adverse living conditions of large groups of the population in her home country and later abroad. About 1906, Eglantyne Jebb had studied to become a teacher and had been involved in political sciences. She wrote the book Cambridge, a Study in Social Questions, that was based on her own research in this field. She aimed to bring modern scientific approach to charity work. In 1913, she traveled to Macedonia on behalf of the Macedonian Relief Fund, a charity organization which supported poor Macedonians in times of the Turkish occupation of Macedonia and oppression of the population. This may have been her starting point to raise funds and organize the huge and overwhelming help at the end of the First World War. A pressure group, the Fight the Famine Council, was set up in Great Britain in 1990 to persuade the British government to end the blockade against the enemy states of the war, Austria and Germany. They were still regarded as enemies in spite of the capitulation and armistice in 1918. The economy of Austria and Germany had come near to collapse at that time, with disastrous consequences for the population of these countries. In order to make the English public aware of the misery, Eglantyne Jebb showed pictures of hungry people from Germany and Austria to pedestrians of Trafalgar Square, and was arrested by the police. The episode demonstrates the enthusiasm and also the energy of her engagement for humanity. After the First World War, many of the international charity organizations were re-established as cooperation across borders was possible again. The catastrophes of the World War were the reason that these organizations decided to primarily alleviate the urgent needs of the millions of people living under severe conditions. Famine was everywhere, but also public and personal morality declined. In particular, the collapse of civilized behaviors in many post-war societies made Eglantyne Jebb concerned about children and their future. She was deeply worried about what she observed in 1919. What she observed. In 1919, she founded the English organization Save the Children Fund, together with her sister Dorothy. And 1 year later, meanwhile in Geneva, in 1920, encouraged by the success of the English organization, the International Save the Children Alliance, namely the International Save the Children Union, was erected. Save the Children is nowadays an organization in 120 countries, the biggest non-governmental organization in the world, devoted to children and engaging in child protection, education, emergency response, health, nutrition, hunger, livelihood, and HIV/AIDS. The British Save the Children Fund and the Swedish Rädda Barnen were the leading members of the alliance. When she planned to internationally expand her activities, she was supported from many sides. Most prominent was Pope Pius the 15th, who inspired her to go the next step. The Save the Children Fund had asked the Pope to support the English fund. The Pope was profoundly impressed by the serious moral situation that inevitably would affect children. In view of the magnitude of the task, he recommended to establish an international organization. The fund should no longer be an isolated international effort, but should associate itself with other committees in Europe pursuing similar ends. And the international organization should not only care for Catholic children, but for all children in need. Eglantyne Jebb followed these recommendations. The Alliance cared for all children without any discrimination and grew rapidly all over the world. Through 1920 and 21, the publicity campaign of an unprecedented scale was performed so that the hardship of European children was known everywhere in the world. Among no people in the world, Eglantyne Jebb writes, except perhaps in Russia during the famine, had there been child suffering on such a scale. There were thousands of orphans and millions of homeless people. when the war problems were decreasing, new crises emerged. A refugee crisis in Greece and the surrounding areas, the consequence of the Greek-Turkish military conflict, floods of refugees after the revolution and civil war in Russia, large numbers of refugees from Armenia, where the hundreds of thousands were murdered by Turkish occupants. Eglantyne Jebb and the Alliance were able to raise funds to a remarkable extent and to actively help children at many places of the European world, as the Save the Children, Save the Children does until now in reaction to local and regional wars, famines, and other catastrophes. The eyes of the world had to be opened to recognize the immense child misery of the world. Well-reflected plans of help were needed. Eglantyne Jebb was the voice of such requirements. Excuse me. Reform are long overdue, she wrote in the 20s of the last century. And we must therefore abolish as far as possible the child suffering which leads to abnormality, dereliction, and this we can achieve to far greater degree we can perhaps imagine. Under such circumstances, another quote from her writings, a child is worked with as little respect as a chisel or a spade, which is used until it wears out, chips or breaks, and is then thrown on the dust heap. Quote, such children brace themselves to endure present hardship and danger, but they lay up stores of future misery, becoming to the physical, mental, and moral degradations which are the usual accompaniment of hunger and outlawry. Another quote, in this respect, it is essential that we should put the world in order, but put it without delay. The intense involvement at so many places in the world helped Eglantyne Jebb to go the next step, to address the international association whose central goal was peace and welfare in the world, the League of Nations. Quote, for we cannot persist in national egoism and at the same time enter upon the enjoyment of all those benefits which can only be evolved through the most intensive international collaboration. The new focus, rights of the child. In order to underline that supporting the suffering children has urgency, the Save the Children International Union drafted and adopted a declaration in the meeting of the organization in Brussels in 1923. The declaration gave the Union the platform and basis of understanding of its work. Eglantyne Jebb proposed that the declaration should be submitted to the plenary of the League of Nations in Geneva in 1924. She carefully prepared this topic on the agenda of the League by numerous talks with delegations and provided translations of the very declaration in 39 languages. 49 member states of the League consented unanimously. As you know, there is a crucial difference between a declaration and an international treaty. The League of Nations adopted a declaration only, which did not imply ratification by national parliaments. For this reason, the Declaration of Geneva on the Rights of the Child is misleading. The Declaration does not entitle children to rights. However, it answered the longing of the international community for sustainable peace, hoping for a new generation. Eglantyne Jebb wrote an article about the Declaration of Geneva, which was published after her death in the volume Save the Child. Quote, "The child, it has been well said, is an international question." And she adds, "The Declaration of Geneva sums up the minimum requirements of mankind for its children." In my view, she correctly qualifies the Declaration of the League of Nations. The Declaration asks for a minimum of protection, but formulated with words which shall pressure the governments to provide this minimum without any hesitation and doubt. Eglantyne Jebb indicates that she is not the only author. She mentions that the declaration was elaborated in a group of engaged people. These convictions have matured in the minds of their formulators. However, the tremendous success made her widely known in the League and among child activists. The declaration is mentioned in the preamble of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations 64 years later. The preamble refers to the Geneva Declaration of the League of Nations, but does not mention Eglantyne Jebb's name. So it remained more or less unknown that she herself and her organization were the authors of the Declaration on the Rights of the Child, shortly the Geneva Declaration. The United Nations Declaration of the Rights of the Child, adopted in 1959 under the head of the United Nations, not even mentioned the Geneva Declaration, although it quotes a sentence of the preamble of the Declaration of the 1944 Declaration without reference to the origin. Perhaps the drafters of the 1989 Convention intended to emphasize the continuity of the efforts aiming at a better protection and promotion of children's rights, and for the reason referred to this honorable document. It is worthwhile to thoroughly look at the text of the declaration. Although it is not international law, it is a remarkable text with powerful language. Eglantyne Jebb wrote, "It is the minimum requirements of the child, which are summed up in the Declaration of Geneva." And she adds that practicability depends on the sincerity with which we accept their justice and truth. The first two clauses define the duty. The first two clauses define the duties of the community with regard to the individual, and the last two clauses deal with the duties of the individual to community. The third clause being in the middle of the whole, implies that the needs of the children should constitute a first charge on public and private resources. Eglantyne Jebb aims high with the Declaration. The Declaration of Geneva is the charter of a new civilization, she writes, because life would demand that we inspire children with love of service. Or another statement, the International Union represents an embryo League of Nations for the purpose of child welfare. On the other hand, she asserts, the Declaration does not, however, contain or demand anything new. Quote, the proper upbringing of our children is not something which has to be indefinitely postponed. It was the degree of internationality that helped to organize a charity organization of such a worldwide expansion. Eglantyne Jebb had the international experience that would be needed to win far-reaching support. This advancement was based on her and her fellow activists' personalities, not on request demanding the implementation of rights. Another catastrophe had to come to make possible the leap forward to rights-based international and national politics. Eglantyne Jebb's leading idea was not right of the child, but welfare of the child. A great idea, but without a rights fundament, more or less lip service compared with human rights today. When you read the documents of the Child Welfare Committee that was founded within the League of Nations in 1925, you find no word about human rights or rights of children. Also, Kate Douglas Diggins from the United Nations, from the USA, Maria Montessori from Italy, or Ellen Kay from Sweden, did not use the term rights in a basic juridical sense, although it is included in headings of their books. They speak of care and education, not about rights. The time had not been right. Only Janusz Kotter, living in Poland from 1878 to 1942, made a biting comment on the Geneva Declaration. He writes, the Geneva lawgivers have confused duties with rights. The tone of the declaration is not insistence but persuasion, an appeal to goodwill, a plea for kindness. This statement does not express that Korczak was opposed to rights of children. On the contrary, he was the only one who clearly recognized and expressed that the right compiled in the Geneva Declaration are no rights. He asks, let us examine honestly how much we allocate to the child population, the underage nation, the subjugated class. What does the inheritance amount to? How should it be divided? Have we not, the unjust stewards, by any chance disinherited, expropriated? And she underscores once more, he underscores once more, these are the governments due, not charity. Korczak's conclusions, not a despotic order, stern discipline, distrustful, contempt for understanding, faith and experience, collaboration and coexistence are the guideline for child care. The child has the right to respect, he argues, and this is to be regarded as a right. Korczak, the Pole and Jew, really spoke of human rights with regard to the child. Some conclusion. There is a reference to the work of Eglantyne Jebb in the preamble of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We should regret that not the faintest hint on the Korczak's ideas and practice is included in the Convention. The line of the League of Nations obviously was more important to the drafters of the Convention. However, increasingly both Eglantyne Jebb and Janusz Korczak are appointed as forerunners, sometimes as parents of the Convention, by child rights activists. It is an attempt to do justice to both. Thank you.